right, well, my name is Becky Carroll, and I am the Extension Specialist for fruits and pecans. And we've been offering these monthly Zooms since coronavirus kind of took away our ability to have workshops and field days and things. So we've been started back in May, and we've had a monthly Zoom until November. And so this will be the first Zoom for 2021. And so I see a lot of returning people from our last year's group, and appreciate everyone following along. We try to talk about timely events for pecan growers, and we have people that tune in that are homeowners, that are master gardeners, we have hobbyist growers, and then we have commercial growers as well. So it's kind of information that hopefully everyone can use. And today we've got a few speakers. Today we've got Charlie Graham. He's going to talk about planting pecan trees. We've got Phil Mulder's going to talk about monitoring for scale insects. And then we've got Jeff Smutny from the American Pecan Council is going to talk to us a little bit about some updates. And then I'll give you some information on how the research station is looking after the ice damage. I'm going to start by just sharing a little bit first, kind of an introduction here. And can everyone see all right? Does it look all right to everybody? Okay. So we're going to talk about just some of the things you need to be thinking about for, is this showing I think it's showing everything
in
there.
Presentation mode.
Yeah.
So.
All right, so some of the things from our calendar fact sheet that we have, HLA 6200, we talk about continue thinning the orchard or groves. So anytime we have an orchard that gets too crowded, we need to talk about doing some thinning and cleaning up, keeping that orchard thinned out properly. We have a fact sheet that explains that, and we've talked a little bit about that in some of our previous Zooms. And then today we're going to be talking about planting bareroot trees, and this is an ideal time, kind of mid-February into first part of March is a great time. I don't know that I would really recommend this week or next week for planting with the snow forecasted and the cold temperatures. And then we're going to talk about scouting for scale. And then another thing to really think about this time of the season is doing your service and repair of all your equipment. After you've used it, kind of get that ready and so you can get it cleaned up and ready for use next season. And then we're going to continue pruning and cleaning up those ice damaged trees. We'll talk about that. And then another thing is preparing your budget for your upcoming growing year. And I saw Roger Saws is on here. He's our budget man for Oklahoma State. And so he has some great information. We may see if we can get him to come on and help out with a little bit of talk about budgeting. And then if you're going to start trees from non-stratified nuts, you can plant those out in the field at this time of the season. Not something I really recommend because not as we don't have as much success with that. But anyway, it's one thing that we can look at. But we're going to go ahead. I'm going to stop sharing and let Charlie go ahead and share his screen. And he's going to talk about planting. He's got to head out for another meeting pretty quickly, so we're going to let him go first. And this is Charlie Graham. He's with the Noble Research Institute. He's a pecan scientist, or the pecan specialist there at Noble. So thanks for joining us today, Charlie.
Okay, can you see everything okay?
I can see it fine.
All right. Like I said, we're going to go ahead and start with this. Hopefully, if you are planning on planting some trees this spring, you've already done all of these things during the last fall and this winter. And by now, you should have chosen your site and prepared your site for planting. You should have already done some soil testing. And of course, I've added any amendments to the soil that you needed to. If it was too acidic, you needed to add some lime or some other nutrients. You should have grow perennial weeds by now last fall. Try to kick some of those perennial weeds out. Should have all your trees marked where they're going to go. And of course, we always recommend you already have your irrigation installed. So when you put those trees out, you can go ahead and put water on those and keep them irrigated so they don't dry out. And finally, you should have ordered your trees last summer so that you got exactly the varieties that you want and not trying to order them this spring where you may have to compromise on the variety that you're going to get. So hopefully you've kind of taken care of all these things. We're going to concentrate mostly on planting trees today. And so that's kind of where we stand. Of course, if you look at trees that you're going to do, you can get a couple different types. I mean, you can either get container grown trees from the nurseries. Those have become a lot more popular now. Used to everything was bare root, and now you get a lot of container nurseries, as well as you still have quite a few bare root nurseries as well. Of course, the difference between the two is you're usually going to pay a little bit more for container grown trees, and also you have a much wider window at which you can plant container grown trees compared to bare root. You generally want to get bare root trees in the ground typically in January, February, no later than usually early March. Whereas container trees we can plant mostly year round, except in midsummer, unless you got really good irrigation on them. It can be a stressful time, but most of the time you can plant pretty much year round on container trees. Of course, if you get bare root trees in and you're not going to be able to get them in the ground when they first come in, a good thing you can do is to heal those trees in to keep the roots from drying out. And that's one of the major problems we have with bare root trees is people will let those roots dry out or freeze. So you can go ahead and dig you a trench and lay those bare root trees in there and cover them up because we're getting so cold, and you may want to put a little hay on top of there to give a little more insulation. You definitely do not want that root system to freeze. And so this is something you can do if you just can't get those trees in the ground. To keep them from drying out and keep them healthy until you get them in the ground. Of course, one of the biggest problems we typically see with planting trees is often they're planted too deep. I mean, that's a really common problem we've seen, and often you don't realize they're too deep until they get probably 10, 12 years old. And then, of course, if you're on the coast and you get a hurricane, but even up here, if we get a severe thunderstorm with good straight line winds at 80 or 90 miles an hour, or a tornado in the vicinity, often you will see those trees lodge over which are planted too deep. So that is a major problem to look for. And so, why are they planted too deep? A common problem used to in the nurseries is when we were planting trees and stuff, they would be grafted low, and then they would fill that soil in around there to keep the graft from drying out for it to take. So you had an artificial soil line above the graft union. And so often people judging by going by that soil line at the nursery, that would make it an issue because you'd be planting those trees too deep going with that original mark on the tree because they actually had grafted it and covered the graft up to keep it from drying out. And so that makes you do a little too deep. And if you do it too deep, you just don't get any pecan roots coming off mature pecan wood. They're not going to force any brace roots out above that graft on mature wood. And so you don't have any brace roots right at the ground level. That makes it weaker and such. And so because the deep, the first roots are, 8 inches deep, 10 inches deep sometimes, you just don't get the bracing you would if the roots were right at the surface of the soil. So like I said, when you typically look at a tree you're putting in the ground, on the tree you see on the left-hand side, you can see that nice, good lateral root, that nice strong one, probably 1/4 inch diameter or everything. That should be right at the ground level or just under the surface of the ground. It's a lot better to plant too shallow than too deep. Okay. The only issue you're going to have if you plant a little bit too shallow is that very top root will dry up and then just break off. But it's better just to be, like I said, a little too shallow than it is to go too deep and lose those trees when they get to be larger in size. So like I say, put your highest lateral root even with or just underneath the soil line. You can see right there. Here you can see the tree that started to grow. You can see that brace root still on the side right there. It's just right above the ground, and that's giving you excellent bracing right at the ground surface. It's maximized the bracing the roots can give you to keep that tree from blowing over. Here you kind of see a picture on the left where the tree was planted too deep. You see those first roots are over 8 feet down in the ground, and those trees will wallow around and usually blow over. Tree on the right is an older tree, but you can see that good strong base where those lateral roots are coming out and spreading out right at the ground surface, and that's a well anchored tree that's going to withstand a lot of wind. Of course, how do we plant the trees? You can dig your holes a lot of different ways. If you got a lot of trees to plant, I'd recommend an auger or the tractor. That's going to be a whole lot quicker. If you just have a few trees, you can rely on the old post hole diggers and go out there and get some exercise and everything and dig a few holes that way. Of course, anytime you dig the holes too deep, when you put the tree in the ground, you want to add some soil back in and tamp that down really solid. And that's a problem we have where you have a soft bottom, you dug the hole too deep, and you have 4 or 5 inches of loose soil in the bottom, and then that settles and the whole tree drops in the hole. And now I've planted the tree too deep when originally it was at the right height. So if you go too deep on your holes, make sure to put the soil back in there and pack it really good so you don't have that tree settle back in the hole later on. Thing that you need to be concerned about if you have a really heavy soil, like a clay soil, is glazing. When you use these augers, that spinning action of that sliding around in the hole with the clay, and if it's a little bit wet, it'll glaze that surface over just like it's a clay pot, and those roots can't penetrate that well. So if you put it on a little piece of rebar or a bolt or something like that, it's going to score that clay when you bring in that auger back out of the hole and rust it up a little bit so you don't have that smooth surface. If you're in a sandy loam soil, you typically don't have to worry about this, but we have some heavy clay soils in Oklahoma, and so that is something you have to be aware of. Of course, I always like to rehydrate my roots before I put them in the ground at least an hour. I mean, if you're just doing a few plants, 5-gallon bucket of water will be fine. Let them soak for an hour or so before you're going to plant. If you're doing a lot of trees, I'll put a 55-gallon drum on a trailer, and you can put quite a few trees in that and have those soak while you're going down there and planting, just to make sure the roots are well hydrated before they go in the ground. Like I said, that's the biggest issue we have is root desiccation. We want to make sure we never let those roots dry out. As far as planting in the hole, you're going to get, depending on the nursery you get from, you get all different depths. I mean, you may get a 30-inch root system, you may only get a 12-inch root system. Just depends on the nursery and how deep they dug the trees and everything. And so just the most important thing to do is to look at that root system, cut off any broken or damaged roots, trim the root system up to match the depth of hole you're going to plant. If I get a 30-inch root system, and my auger's only going to be planting, I'm only digging 18 inches deep, we've got to cut that other 12 inches off to make that root system match the depth of the hole. So just be sure that, your tree root system length is matching the depth of your hole. Okay, so they won't have any tree settling or anything. Like so we find usually tree survival and growth is all dependent on new root development. And just like if you look at the top of a tree and we prune a limb off, what happens? You get multiple buds break and you get multiple small limbs where you cut that off. The same thing happens with the root system. When that root's been cut off, you get multiple roots form where that cut occurred. And so now you're going to have a lot of new roots coming off those cuts. Like I say, you can cut a bare root off here, but if we're talking about container trees, these things you have to consider about the root system on those. When you pull it out of the pot, flip it up in there and take a look at it. If it's been in that pot for a couple of years, you can often have 4 or 5 circles of roots around the bottom of that pot. And it's important at this time while it's going to go ahead and trim all those circling roots off before you put it in the ground. There's a couple of different schools of thought on the container trees. I know a lot of people will shake that media off before they plant it. So it's more like a bare root when they plant it. Some will go ahead and plant it just as is. But just like I said, be aware that, you make sure that you get the soil packed in good around it. And, the hole's no deeper than what that pot height is, so that you have no settling going down and have the root, the tree planted too deeply in the hole. So like I said, once you put your tree in the ground and everything, you're looking at your lateral root height and make sure it's not too deep. If it is too deep, plant some soil back in there to make sure it's not too deep. Like I say, these are kind of some things you can follow. Position the tree, get in the hole where it's going to be straight, is in the line with the rest of your row and everything. Start filling that hole with your soil. When you get it about half filled or so, tamp it down a little bit, then flush water over the surface of it to settle that soil down. What we're after is trying to get rid of any air pockets we may have. You want that water to wash that soil in around the roots and have good contact with the roots. Then finish covering up the tree in the hole and everything and firming up. And notice I said firming up. I didn't say pack it, compacted. I've seen, people planting trees and they throw 250 pounds of body on their foot and they ram it down in that hole and everything sinks, 4 to 6 inches. But you're just breaking roots whenever you do that and driving that down. So do it right and you won't have to pack it that hard. If you position it, fill it, tamp it, flush it, Finish covering it, then firm it up with your foot. Don't compact it into the hole. Okay. I mean, the whole idea behind the planting is just to get the soil settled around that plant so it's not going to settle anymore, and to get all the air pockets out so you don't have any roots drying out from the air pockets. Of course, then we usually typically come back behind those, especially on bare roots, and cut a third to half the tree off. And people have different ideas about this. If you talk to an arborist, he'll say, don't do it, it's unsightly. If you talk to an orchardist, he'll say, yes, do it. And the reason we typically do that is to equalize the top of the tree with the bottom of the tree, because when it came out of the nursery, we cut a lot of roots off, and now you've got that entire top that was being fed by a lot of roots. So we're trying to equalize the root shoot ratio. But what you're also trying to do is when you cut that tree back, those new shoots that come out are much easier to train than a weak shoot coming out. You want that first top shoot or two, you leave a couple of good primary buds at the top and choose one of those, and that's going to be a really strong growing shoot that you can train into a central leader. Whereas if you don't cut anything off, that tree may sit for a year and only have 4 to 6 inches of growth on it. It's very weak, and those are very hard to train. And you just seem to lose some time on there. So that's some of the reasons we cut those trees off, to try to invigorate the tree and produce better growth, equalize that root system. So kind of in summary, this is kind of takes you through the whole thing. As I said, do not allow the trees to dry out. You know, heel them in if you can't get them in the ground, to try to prevent that. You want to keep everything moist and covered. Dig your tree, you know, depth, depending on what your root system is. If you want to go 24 inches because you got 24 inches root, I mean, that's fine. Like I say, dig the hole based on the depth of your root system. Of course, fill the hole with the same soil. Don't bring in, if I'm in a heavy clay soil, I'm not going to fill the hole with a bunch of sand. Basically, I made a well, and that'll actually waterlog. The water will move out the clay into the sand and fill it with water and drown out that tree. So always put back the same soil you pulled out of the hole back into the hole. Of course, we're going to use about a quart to half full of water to pack that in. As I said, you know, firm it up or pack it lightly, don't compact it. Of course, once we get the trees in the ground, we always worry about a couple of things. Sun scald is one of them. Herbicide damage is another if you're going to be spraying any herbicides around the trees. So we usually try to put tree wraps on there, or you can use white latex paint. And we talked about pruning those trees back. And here's the two most important factors probably in young tree survival and growth. It's going to be eliminating weed competition and adequate irrigation. Okay, if you plant a tree out there and the Johnson grass comes up around it and outgrows the tree, and I've got 6-foot Johnson grass growing with a 3-foot tree, that's not a good situation for a tree to survive. Also with adequate irrigation. Once I put it in the ground, it's got adequate water because I use water to settle the soil. But then if I say that's the last time I'm going to water it and we hit a drought later on in the spring, it's probably going to have an adequate root system to pull enough water to keep that tree alive. So those are probably the two most important things after that tree goes in the ground to keep that tree alive and growing well, is to make sure you reduce your weed competition and have adequate water to it. So here you can see here's a nice planted field here where it's just ground cover and you've got a good cover around the trunk to help provide. If you want to go an extra step, I mean, here's another orchard where they actually went in and put the covers and actually mulched around the trees, you know, so they've got 3 or 4 inches of good bark mulch around the trees just to maintain a good humid environment, maintain water around the trees so it doesn't dry out as quickly. So that's another step you can take as well. So that just gives you a couple of different options that you can see right there. That kind of wraps things up.
All right. Yeah, we did some research with looking at using mulch for weed control as well. And we were putting about a 6-foot square around those trees and about 4 to 6 inches deep of just bark. It's a lot of work to get that in place, especially when you have a large planting, but it really benefited with the weed control and keeping that moisture there for the tree to.
Typically, if I'm talking to a homeowner or someone like that that's just putting out a half dozen trees or dozen trees, I'll often recommend putting mulch around the trees because it's labor intensive. But if it's just a few trees, when you get into commercial grower trying to put out 50 acres of pecans, mulching becomes a lot more difficult.
Yeah.
So typically for homeowners or people just planting a few trees, I always recommend mulching. It just gives you good uniform moisture content around the trees. You don't have the ups and downs of dry cycles and things like that. And so I find it helps the trees establish really good.
Yeah. So had a question in the chat. It says, what about landscape barrier for weed control the first few years? So
As long as you're using a weed barrier that's porous, it allows water to go through. You can't use a solid plastic barrier or something like that, because then water can't get through unless you have irrigation lines underneath it to keep the tree irrigated. But if you're using a porous woven fabric, it's going to allow water to travel through that weed barrier. I mean, that works fine too.
some of that really good quality fabric mulch will last for many years in place.
Yeah, several years you'll get out of it, and you don't have to worry about having to add new bark mulch on there. It doesn't blow off and everything. But like I said, just make sure it is one of those woven fabrics that's going to allow water to penetrate rather than just run off.
Charlie, there's another question that says on old trees that are like 45 years old or so, it says where there's a root flare, where the root flare is not showing, would it make a stronger tree to carefully dig down to uncover the tree's root flare?
Not necessarily, because I mean, you're going to dig right around the trunk, but a tree that old already has roots 100 feet out from the tree. So at that age, we typically don't see those older trees blow down. The ones you typically see blow down in hurricanes and stuff are usually anywhere from 8 to 12 years old. Typically, they're younger trees that just get not as much root system underneath them and a lot more top, and they've been growing very vigorously at that age, and you just have more stress on the young age of tree than you have on the really old trees.
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen big native trees that have survived major hurricanes and they lost a limb or two, but you just couldn't take the tree down.
Anyone else have a question for Charlie before he has to leave today?
Yeah, I'm sorry I'm double booked today, but I've got two things going on at one time. I'm skipping out of one to talk to y'all.
Yeah, he's playing hooky right now for his other place he's supposed to be. All right, well, if you have questions for Charlie and you need to get a hold of him later, you can always message me and I'll get you in contact with him. But appreciate you being with us today, and information on planting the trees. Getting it started out right is going to help you in the long run. So pay attention to how you plant the trees and get them off to a good start. So but thank you a lot, Charlie. Appreciate it.
Hope y'all enjoy the rest of the meeting.
All right, thank you.
Be safe.
All right, so I think our next speaker will be Phil Mulder, and he's going to talk to us a little bit about looking for scale insects. And I never really had noticed scale on our pecans before until last year, and it was in an area that was a little bit overgrown. It's a little bit tight, and we didn't take care of those trees quite as well as some other areas, and we saw some scale showing up on some of those branches. So we'll let Phil talk to us about what we're looking for.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Yeah, go ahead and put it into the
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So
Can you switch? I think we're looking at, go up to display settings and switch your, you see that at the top, the very top of your screen where it says show taskbar? You have a double, yeah.
Yeah.
Go to display settings, Phil. On the right next to that, yeah. And swap presenter view, yeah.
Okay.
Right there, yeah.
How's that?
That's good.
Okay. Okay. So we're going to start talking about early season pests, and believe it or not, there are some critters out there. I noticed that somebody had asked about pecan weevil. Would we get some benefit from this cold weather that we're experiencing? It's possible. I can't honestly say, because what I hear is that we haven't had weather this cold for such a prolonged period of time since 1980. I don't know, is that necessarily true? Wes Lee might know the answer to that, but we haven't had weather this cold, from what I hear, since 1980. So in light of that, and I didn't show up here in Oklahoma until 1985, so I really don't know the answer to that. I would doubt that we'd get much benefit from trying to control pecan weevils with cold temperatures, because pecan weevil are down in the soil, maybe to a depth of 12 inches or more. It's kind of unusual that they'd be that deep. But in a sandy soil, it's certainly possible. In a tight clay soil, I would imagine they'll go much shallower. So I wish I knew the answer, but I haven't been around Oklahoma but 36 years, and so I can't really tell you. And I haven't experienced that kind of cold that we're going to be seeing in the next few days. What we might see is some insulation effect from all that snow, but that kind of remains to be seen. Okay, if you have questions, I would encourage you to contact me. There's my email address and my telephone number. That's my direct line. So if you have something, a burning question or a burning concern, you can call me at that number. Or better yet, it's probably better if you email me and actually have a picture of something that you might want to show me. So kind of consider that as a possibility. We're going to be talking about throughout the workshop that we're in and throughout the Zoom meetings that we're in this year, we're going to be talking about integrated pest management. And it's a sustainable approach to manage pests that combines all of these things: prevention, avoidance, monitoring, and suppression. And the bottom line is, how does it help your bottom line in terms of the economics, in terms of the health benefits, and in terms of environmental risks? And a good integrated pest management program, first and foremost, should save the grower money. It should also be sustainable from an environmental standpoint, and it should hopefully increase yields. But that all remains to be seen because there's so many factors you can't control, such as the weather. We'll talk about different pests at different times of the year, but this kind of gives you an overall view of what we're facing. So right now we're in that dormant season. We won't reach bud break probably till the first part of April in the southern part of the state, maybe mid-April in the northern part of the state. So kind of keep your eye out on this overall generalized calendar and for the pests that you're likely to confront. And you can see it can occur anytime from that April period on up through November in some cases, depending upon what we're facing or what pests we're combating. So. But we're going to look at dormant season problems that have arisen. And as Becky said, she never really had much appreciation for scale problems until this last year when we had heavy infestations of obscure scale on the station. And so we're really trying to save dollars during this time of the year by lowering pest populations early. Now, keep in mind, the dormant applications that I'm going to suggest here actually help not only to control scale insects, but can help quite a bit with other types of pests, because things like aphids and borers, particularly aphids, may overwinter in the bark crevices, and other pests may overwinter in the bark crevices. And if we make a really thorough application of a dormant oil, we can do a fairly good job of suppressing those populations. So you should inspect your trees during this time of the year for trunk and limb problems, especially from scale insects, from borers, and from phylloxera, which we'll talk more about phylloxera in March. But you can get some benefit out of what we're going to talk about today in controlling all of these pests with a dormant season application. So keep in mind, this has got to be done before the first part of April. Okay. Obscure scale is our #1 scale pest on pecan, undoubtedly. It can weaken the trees. It can attack a number of trees, and ultimately they draw the sap from the tree branches. Entire limbs can die if you see the kind of infestation you see on that left picture. Affected trees are more susceptible to borers. They weaken the limbs and foliage, and making foliage diseases perhaps more likely. And they can ultimately reduce yield. And if it gets bad enough, especially on a younger tree, it could actually kill the tree. You know, there's just too much stress on it. Okay, obscure scale is a problem often in neglected trees. So even though we did have this problem on the station last year, probably the #1 means of neglect is we just don't monitor for it. It's not a common pest problem that we see year in and year out. So we sort of neglect it by the fact that it's not an important pest, but it can become an important pest. So what we want to do is inspect the limbs for female scales overwintering on 1 or 2 year old wood. And in terms of inspection, I'm not talking about counting them. We actually did this, we've counted them before, but it's a laborious process. So what we're looking for is just an absence or presence on individual limbs. And keep in mind, the populations can explode very quickly. So this time of year and even a little bit later is a good time. But remember, you want to get out there and do something or make a management decision before that first part of April. Control initiated in the winter with dormant oils, and apply that application between leaf drop the previous year, of course, and before bud break. So we don't normally recommend making that application in the heart of winter. We want the temperature to be above, right around that 40-degree area, maybe even a little bit warmer before we're making that application. And coverage is absolutely the key here, because you're trying to get the coverage idea will be answered by how are you controlling it, and we'll see that in this next slide. We treat all the major limbs and shoots, including 1-year-old shoots, and we coat them with dormant oil solution. And the oils control, so this is what I'm talking about in terms of how they work. The oils control scale by suffocation to a great extent, but also by disrupting the cell membranes in those animals. There is little to no residual activity from that dormant oil application, and it essentially affects all stages of the scale. And it can also have a profound effect on mites that may be overwintering in those bark crevices, and other overwintering insects that are taking advantage of that potential site. There's minimal potential for resistance, because you're really dealing with something that is more of a physical deterrent or a physical killer, rather than something that has an insecticide in it. It's low toxicity to humans and other mammals, but the primary problem is potential phytotoxicity. So if you are out there in early April or mid-April and you're thinking, oh, I'm going to control those scale insects, so I'm going to use dormant. No, don't do that. Do not do that. You could effectively kill that tree, or at least set it back for a period of time. So dormant oils are derived from paraffinic crude oil, and they're the heaviest petroleum-based sprays with a low unsulfonated residue. Now, an unsulfonated residue is the assessment of its phytotoxic compounds. Usually, we're talking about something 92%, so that it's highly refined and therefore less potential for phytotoxicity. Unfortunately, a lot of the dormant oils generally have a unsulfonated residue of about less than 92%. So very, very important to make applications when the trees are in full dormancy. And that's now, not necessarily today because of the extreme cold, as we'll see here at the bottom of the slide. And a 2 to 4% application rate is recommended on most labels. Continual and strong agitation is a necessary component. You don't want that to settle out in your container. And never apply when the temperatures are less than 33 degrees. And like I said, it's best if it's 40 degrees for over a 24-hour period. I wouldn't even mind it at 50 degrees. But if it starts to get really warm and you start to get bud break in any shape or form, any kind of green material, you run the risk of phytotoxicity. So be careful about that. Okay, how do you survey for obscure scale? We suggest that you inspect 3 limbs on 5% of the trees in December through March. Okay, so in my case, I'm a pecan grower. I'm not a pecan producer yet because my trees are all small. But if I were a pecan producer and worried about scale, I've got about 130 trees, so I would be looking at about 6 or 7 trees. So if I go out there and rate each tree on a 0 to 3 scale, 0 to 3 limbs with scale, present or absent. So you're actually getting just one number for each tree checked. So on those 7 trees, let's say you get 0, a 1, a 3, a 2, a 1, a 0, and a 2. That's about 1.2 scale rating or orchard rating. So you add all those numbers up and you come up with the sum of the tree rating divided by the number of trees. So the sum of the tree rating divided by the number of trees, in my case 7, and the sum of those 7 trees I just threw out at you, and I've got this written down in my little notes in front of me, would be 7, 8, 9, 10. So 7 divided by 10 is 1.2. So I would treat with a dormant oil because my threshold is 0.5 or more. On the other hand, if I randomly chose 7 trees in there and I came up with only 3 trees rated as a 1, okay, in other words, rated with 1 limb affected in each tree, 1 number for each tree, then it would be 3 divided by that 7. And so that's about 4.42. So not necessary to treat. And kind of keep in mind, scale, like we'll find out with phylloxera next month, is not something that travels a great distance, so you're not going to explode it into the orchard or throughout the orchard in just one season. But it's something that down at the Perkins station, I hope they take the time to treat because it was pretty bad last year. And we could see some examples of this right here. And once again, it's not necessarily their fault. It's just the fault of the system because we have a tendency to sort of ignore these obscure things like obscure scale and pay more attention to the major pests like pecan weevil and webworms and pecan nut case bear. So you have to actively be out there scouting for these particular pests. And in looking at this, I guess the question is it time to spray these trees? And I hope everyone out there has said, no, it's too late because there is green material on those trees. The buds have broken. So this is probably late April, maybe mid-April. And it's already too late to use a dormant oil. You'll get burned on those trees. So you don't want to do it at that time. And the bottom line is thorough coverage is important. You got to do it before bud break. And you got to get the kind of coverage that you see on the right with this little child here. So not with mud either. Okay, so the question is, what is this damage? And I would say stay tuned in March. But I think most of you realize this is phylloxera. And we'll talk about it in March, and we're going to talk about it early, even though you see it on this tree when it's fully leafed out. But we'll talk about it in March because that period of time in April is when that leaf expansion first starts, is when we want to control this. And we'll talk about that in more detail at that time. And so, Becky, that's all I have.
There's a couple of questions that are in the chat. Okay. And Gerald asked if trimming the limbs that have scale would limit its spread.
Yeah, but can you be sure you got them all?
Yeah.
I guess that's the most important question. Can you be sure that you've actually got them all? It's kind of like webworm, can you be sure you've got all the webworm trimmed out and you could have more coming in? So, and in a large orchard where you've got large trees, 45-year-old trees or something like that was mentioned earlier, it's going to be tough to see what you do have up there.
Okay.
It's possible. It's possible on smaller trees.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And I have another question. Sarah asked if it would be worth a dormant oil spray to smother other things like fungus or bacteria.
A dormant oil for fungus. Well, our primary fungus or primary disease problem is pecan scab. And scab does overwinter in the orchard, but I don't know that you would get a great deal of benefit from trying to use a dormant oil on scab. Since most of the overwintering capacity for scab is maybe on fallen leaves or fallen nuts or things of that nature. So you wouldn't be actually applying it to the ground, you'd be applying the dormant oil to the tree itself.
It may have some effect, but I know some people, there's a little bit of interest in looking at spraying early season with a fungicide. So we'll talk about that a little bit later, but that's a good question, Sarah. And Phil, your comment about you hope we spray those trees this year for scale.
Yeah.
We won't.
You won't.
No, because
they've been damaged to it.
those trees are broken down and they're going to be bulldozed out. So in the area where we had the scale, the trees are just really, really, really bad. So we're going to take that orchard out, and we're looking at starting a new orchard in that area. But we will not be spraying.
Yeah, and I can see why. Wes Lee commented that 1983 was pretty cold, and I know he wasn't here during that time, and I wasn't either. So once again, you know, I didn't show up till 85. He said, we may or may not break a coldest temp record, but we are likely to break duration below freezing stretch. So, and then maybe we'll know. Will we see much pecan weevil or many other pests that could be significant pecan? Or remains to be seen.
Yeah, I think we went below freezing on Monday morning, and we're supposed to continue until, I don't know, the upcoming Saturday or Sunday of this next week. So it's
my 3-acre pond is frozen solid.
Oh, well, be careful when you're out there trying to.
No, I'm not walking on it.
All right, our next speaker, we have a special guest from the American Pecan Council. He's going to talk about the new USDA Pecan Research and Promotion Program. Jeff Smutny is the Director of Marketing and Regulatory Affairs for APC. So appreciate you joining us today, Jeff. And if you'd like to share your screen.
Will do, and thanks for having me, Becky. I appreciate it.
It's a pretty laid back group, so we can
Perfect.
Ask.
Can you all see the screen?
Yes, if you could put it
Here,
in.
let me go to slideshow here.
Yeah.
Oh. Wait a minute, let's try it this way. Can you see it now?
No, we're just seeing a slideshow, resume slideshow.
Okay. Going from, let's see, going from the current slide.
Can you go down to
Go from beginning and
down here at the bottom? Maybe this might get you started down on the slideshow.
Let's see. Trying to get there. You're stop sharing, you share, you are screen sharing.
There we go.
You got it?
Yeah.
Good.
Good, perfect. Okay, well, thanks for having me here today, Becky. I appreciate the opportunity to share some exciting news with all of you. I'm Jeff Smutny, and I'm with the American Pecan Council. But the news I have here today is to share the fact that the USDA has approved a new program for us, the American Pecan Promotion Board. The APPB, as it's affectionately known, was submitted by the National Pecan Federation, the lobbying wing of the pecan industry. And after about 18 months of going back and forth with USDA, the USDA published a notice for comment in the Federal Register. And that was back in November. And that notice of comment, they received 60 comments approximately on the new promotion board. Comments were overwhelmingly in support of the new program, with just about every negative comment not really showing a clear understanding of what was being proposed. Regardless of that fact, the USDA addressed each and every comment in their decision. And based on the feedback from industry, the former secretary of the USDA, Sonny Perdue, approved the program with an expected activated date of October 1st, 2021. The final approval came through and was published in the Federal Register on January 13th. Now that we have a new USDA secretary, or about to have a new USDA secretary, a former secretary, my former boss, Secretary Tom Vilsack, the new administration put all actions on hold for up to 60 days. We are still waiting for that final approval. Once we receive that, which should actually be any day, we have no reason to believe that this program won't go through as implemented by October 1st. So what is the new APPB, and what will it do for our industry? So the main question is, why do we need another pecan program? And we have over 20 of them as it sits right now. So I believe this is a pretty valid question. And the main answer to that question is pretty simple. This is the only program, only mandated program that's available to this industry so that we can start collecting assessments on imported pecans. Back in 2018, when APC hired their new management team, which I was a part of that, we had traveled across the 15 growing states, and the number one question after stop we heard was, what are you going to do about assessing imports? Well, working with the NPF, this new program is what developed to create a solution to that question. This program focuses on promotion and research only. The program will be funded by a 2-cent assessment per in-shell pound of pecans. There's no additional cost to producers in addition to the APC. So right now the APC has a assessment of 3 cents per pound in shell, 2 cents per pound for natives. The APC will be lowering its assessment to 1 cent per pound. It will not be assessing natives no longer. That assessment will go over to the new APPB, where all pecans will be assessed at 2 cents. So we wanted to kind of keep that assessment rate the same so that there was no increase for domestic producers, but USDA does not permit us to assess one body more than the other with this new promotion program. So that assessment rate had to be set at 2 cents. So that's 2 cents on domestic produced pecans as well as 2 cents on imported pecans. And that's on a per in-shell basis. The collection on the imported pecans will take place at the border by Customs and Border Patrol. They will grab the check as you cross the border, and then that check will be delivered to this new APPB. So with that collection of additional assessments, we expect to receive $4 to $6 million in additional marketing dollars for the pecan industry. Also, growers will retain a majority hold on this program, just like the APC. And the body will include 10 growers and 7 importers. We had an initial request go out for anyone that was interested in volunteering for this board. We received about 50 names. USDA has instructed us to expand that open period for collecting volunteers. Another request will be going out on Wednesday of next week. So if you're interested in taking part in the APPB, if you're a grower or if you're an importer, please submit your name. That information will be coming out. You can submit your name to info@americanpecan.com. That window of opportunity will remain open until March 26th. Then on March 26th, the APC will gather those names, deliver them to USDA, where Tom Vilsack will make a decision in regards to who will sit on the board. There are no alternate members on this board, so it's strictly 10 growers and 7 importers. Those importers are technically shellers and accumulators, anyone that imports product from another country. Let's see here. So here's the differences between the APC and the APPB. The APC assesses American pecans only. The APPB, of course, will collect assessments from all imports. Australia, South Africa, South America, Mexico. The APC can implement mandatory grades and standards. The APPB can conduct research and promotion. The APC can also conduct research and promotion. The APC can collect more specific data. There's also a compliance component to both programs. Similar makeup of the board with shellers, accumulators being importers on the APPB side. As you can see, there's some similarities between the two. It's not clear right now, and it will be up to the board, the selected board, to determine what authorities will stick to the APC and what authorities will the APPB embrace. Hypothetically, it's going to be research and promotion over on the APPB side. And so really with this program, what you're going to get is best of both worlds. And it's really the only hybrid for an industry that currently exists. We are the guinea pig for the USDA. So much so that when the approval for this program was published, the wing of the Federal Marketing Order Branch, which is known as MOAD, Marketing Order and Agreement Division, and the Promotion and Economic Division decided to merge, because now we have lots of commodity programs that want to have a checkoff program as well as a federal marketing order, and vice versa. Now checkoff programs are interested in federal marketing orders. So we will be the first to cross this bridge, which is pretty exciting that USDA would put that type of faith and respect into towards our industry. Again, there's no increase for domestic. In fact, it'll stay at 3 cents, 1 cent on the APC side, 2 cents on the APPB side. We'll be able to collect on imports. We'll be able to capture more data now as product comes in from the other foreign countries. In the past with APC, we could only collect data from domestic handlers. We were unable to collect that data from exporters from Mexico that say we're selling direct to Costco or to Walmart. Now they will have to be data. In addition to that, growers will now have to provide some data in regards to the movement of their pecans through the handler. The handler will provide us with that information. We get to add an additional $4 to $6 million towards marketing, promotion, and research without having a further impact from the domestic producer. The APC will still be able to conduct quality assurance programs and grades and standard programs to ensure that foreign countries don't turn the United States into a dumping ground. And then both programs will have grower majorities. So that's basically the rundown of the APPB. If you have any further questions, I'm happy to answer them now, or you can reach out to me at info@americanpecan.com. With that, I'll open it up to questions.
Does anyone have a question for Jeff at this time? We'll see if we can schedule Jeff or Alex to come back and talk about the APC and the marketing impact they've had on our pecan industry soon. Any questions? Does everyone understand? It's going to be the same amount of assessment, but it's just going in different places this time, so they'll be able to assess those imports as well. No questions?
You guys are easy.
Here's one. It says, to clarify, is APPB collected the assessment on all pecans or only imported pecans?
That good question. Yeah, maybe I wasn't clear on that. No, they will assess all pecans, but they will assess all pecans at 2 cents, not 3 cents, like is currently being assessed on the APC side. The APC will reduce its assessment rate to 1 cent. So your assessment will stay the same. Imported pecans will be assessed at 2 cents through the APPB as well. Any other questions?
So Jeff, Jeff, you said that, I mean, you used the term, so I'm just going to use your own words, maybe against you. You used the term of, so we wouldn't be a dumping ground. So what's to keep us from being a dumping ground from some of these foreign countries with?
Sure, yeah, that's very good. Yeah, so that's where the APC does come in. Okay, right now, there's not much you can do about foreign product. We can't not discriminate on product coming into the United States. It's just not possible. So what we can do is we can implement grades and standards that are quality focused, so that a minimum grade or standard can't enter the United States. It's called this is only available through a federal marketing order. It's Section 8E. It's a law that's in place that's only available to federal marketing orders, which stipulates that if industry sets a grade or standard, and those grades and standards are mandatory through some sort of inspection by a government body or by a third party, that grade and standard that's mandated is then mandated on any product entering the United States. So that's the main tool of the APC. That is something that cannot be implemented through the new program, the APPB. So that's why they work in conjunction very well. It's kind of who's checking the checker, and we have a little bit more authority over foreign product coming in to the United States.
Okay, thank you, Jeff.
So Jeff, I have a question in the chat. It says, how will this positively impact a small producer?
How will it positively impact a small producer? Well, federal marketing orders, federal marketing programs are designed to benefit a small producer, because normally small producers don't have the funds to go out and market and create a market for their commodity, for their product. This way we can pool funds together. Those funds have specific purposes, and those purposes are technically marketing and promotion. Furthermore, we can conduct research as well. So if you're a small producer, you can't go out and fund $150,000 in health research to be able to message on to consumers that pecans are heart healthy, or that pecans are loaded with antioxidants. Pooling your funds together, that is a way of doing that as well. Furthermore, we can conduct research on production research to help the Noble Foundation, for instance, to conduct research, or OSU to conduct research on improving your agricultural practices out in the field. So those are some of the ways that it helps the small producer.
There's a lot of ways it's going to be helping everyone that's producing pecans on just getting the word out to people on what they can do with pecans and the benefits. And some of those programs we were talking about that they were doing research is on proper storage of pecans to try to get, some of our grocery stores to put them into the cold freezer area. So they'll be better quality in the northern states where they don't have fresh pecans. So there's a lot of things. And if you go to that webpage, the AmericanPecan.com, you'll see a lot of great information that is available to consumers, but also there's a section for the industry that you can sign up and see what's happening. You'll get emails, and it's really, really good information. I have another question. Kyle says, what is the threshold for the APPB assessment kicking in on domestic producers in terms of pounds produced?
Sure. That threshold is 50,000 pounds per year. They'll take a look. When I say they, it's USDA that has set this threshold. They take a look at 3 of the past producing years. You've produced 50,000 pounds or more, then you're obligated to pay that assessment. And that's in shell pounds.
Thank you. Any other questions for Jeff? If you need to get in touch with him, his contact information, you can get in touch with American Pecan on that web page as well, or you can contact me and I can get you in touch with them also. Yeah,
sure. Our phone number, 817-916-0020, or you can send us an email at info@americanpecan.com as well. Be happy to spend time with you. Yeah. Hey, thank you very much for the time, everybody.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Jeff. It's great. All right, so we are running over a little bit today, and if you have to leave, I understand that's not a problem, but I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit more about what the research station looks like right now for the cleanup after the ice damage. And I think I need to move my screens here a little bit. All right, so can you see it all right? Is that all right, Phil?
Yeah.
So if you weren't with us in November, you might not have seen some of these pictures, but this is from the Cimarron Valley Research Station. And October 26th and 27th, we had a really, everything has been, kind of crazy in 2020. Well, this was another one of those crazy, unprecedented type of things to happen in 2020. So we ended up with a lot of damage to our research station, and the trees, some took a lot of damage. So we had a full leaf load. It was, we hadn't had a freeze yet to lose leaves. It was late October. And so full leaf load, we had a big pecan crop still hanging in those trees. We'd had a chance to harvest the first round on some of the varieties, but we hadn't been able to get to all of them. And then we end up with about an inch of ice. And this came over a 2-day period, and it just kept building and building and building. And we would, my husband and I, Jimmy he works there at the station, and we would sit out and just listen to the limbs cracking and breaking. And I posted some video on the Oklahoma Pecan Management Facebook page. But I was excited because I was catching the breakage on video, and he's just cringing because he knows he's going to have to clean it up. And I was really sad because most of these trees we've grown from seed too. So it was a really bad time at the station, just seeing the amount of damage that we were going to have to clean up and start over. We really couldn't assess what we had because we had so many leaves and nuts still in the tree. It was hard to see what was actually broken. And so here's Jimmy. He's all decked out in his safety gear. And it's important. If you're doing any of this type of work, you need to take safety, as a top priority. But it was cleaning up mode as soon as they could get everything started. And so the pole saw was a key to getting it cleaned up, to be able to get those first things cleaned up. The grapple on the front of this was key to cleaning up that downed limbs that were in the orchard floor. And so that grapple just picks up those limbs and then piles them into the big trash piles, and those were burned later. But all of those limbs that they were moving to those burn piles, they were all loaded with nuts whenever they fell off the tree. So they were losing some of the crop as they were moving that to the burn piles. But the first step was just getting anything that was not attached to the tree out of the rows so they could actually drive through the orchard. It was so crowded you couldn't actually drive down some of the rows. So this was the first step. We had a Gillison, it was a 25-foot pruning tower, had a hydraulic pole saw, and Chad Selman loaned that to us to let us get up into the tree and get those trees cleaned up. We really wanted to get through and get those cans of pecans harvested. And so Jimmy and another person went through and cleaned up the orchard floor under the Kanza block just so they could harvest those trees. And the cuts they were making were mainly just, you know, these broken limbs that were hanging on still, but they were in the way of the harvester. So they were making quick cuts to get those all down and dragged out of the way. It's hard to see because a lot of them had so many leaves still on there on what cuts need to be made, but it was kind of a quick, you know, cleanup mode. And so they cleaned up all the limbs that they cut off. They used the limb rake to take up all the small limbs, and then went ahead and harvested underneath those cans of trees. And you can see in this picture on the right, the left side is where they have cleaned it up once so they could harvest. And then the right side hasn't been touched yet, except for the limbs that were not attached. And so this has been harvested. It's been raked, all the limbs out, and they had harvested with a machine and got about 14,000 pounds off of that block of trees. But as I walk through there still, there are a lot of pecans left out in the orchard. Not so much in this area where they did that first cleanup, but in these areas where they haven't been able to harvest. And so they got about 14,000 pounds off of that one block, but they lost a great amount of those pecans cleaning up, dragging them out, dragging the limbs out, and probably would have been able to harvest another probably 6,000 or 8,000 pounds of nuts out of the orchard. So that was a big loss, was just the amount of nuts that we didn't harvest this year as well. And then so right now they're doing some other cleanup after this harvest time. So our focus is not on harvest, it's cleaning up some other branches and broken things. So if you look at this was that November time. And after the ice was gone, we still had green leaves. And we didn't get cold enough to actually damage the leaf tissue or the shuck tissue. So those shucks hadn't opened if they hadn't. And it stayed green for a while. Now the branches that were broken, they did go ahead and dry down. But you can see it's kind of difficult to tell what we actually had there. And so this is when they've gone through, this is about the same rows, just a little bit different angle. But you can kind of tell from the tops of the trees, it looks like similar trees. And these are Kanza. And our Kanza trees were planted on 35 between trees and a 70-foot in between the rows. And so these trees were getting really crowded between each other. And it was almost time that we were going to have to think about thinning those rows out because they weren't producing very much in between these two trees. Now they still have plenty of space between the rows, but between the trees, they were kind of tied at a 35-foot spacing. Well, now we're not going to have to think about thinning or doing any type of hedging at this point because the ice did our thinning for us. So they'll be able to refill this canopy and maintain production for several more years. But what they ended up doing now is they are cleaning up any split limbs, any jagged breaks, or anything that's hanging still in the tree. And so we hired a new person to work at the station, and he started right after the first of the year and immediately was thrown into pruning the orchard. So he's a trooper and learning a lot and hard worker. So I really appreciate how has a great work ethic. And so he's learning, and there's some cuts that maybe could have been done a little bit different, but he's brand new. So the idea is just to get through the orchard and get it cleaned up. So we have to switch from that 25-foot pruning tower, and this is a telescoping boom lift that can actually go up to 150 feet. That's pretty tall. That's pretty scary to be up that high. And so he can actually park in the middle of the row, that's 70 foot, and work on 2 rows without moving the boom itself. And so he can go, can maneuver it quite well in that area. But it was needed, we needed the bigger lift to be able to get up higher in those trees and work more at an angle instead of reaching up to do those pruning techniques. So he's gone through on this row in the middle and taken off anything that was split or broken or jagged cuts. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But while he's up in this lift, he has a harness on, and it's all equipped with all the safety gear that he needs. They had to be trained on using these lifts because they are so large. So whenever you're doing any type of pruning up in the top of the trees, we want to, we're taking off those broken and jagged branches, but also while he's up there, you can also kind of do some cuts to take care of some of those narrow crotch angles that might cause some issues later. And we don't really want to leave these little short stubs, because often those little stubs are going to die back, and it may be kind of an area where you're going to end up with an entry point for wood rotting fungi or something, and cause some issues to that main part of that scaffold branch. And so cut those things back flush, or leave that branch collar. Don't cut it flush, but leave a branch collar. And like we talked about in November, to do your proper cuts. But this branch probably should have been cut off right here. This branch probably should have been cut right here. And then on this right side, we've got 2 branches right here. And if you notice, this has the bark has been ripped on it. So instead of making 2 cuts right here and leaving it, it probably would have been better to cut this branch off and then cut this limb right here. You would remove that area that's been ripped where the bark is removed, and then also you'd take care of that really tight crotch angle up higher up in the tree. So it's more work, but if you're up there and you have a lift, it's something that you can do. And on this side, this branch probably could have been removed as well. Either remove this side or take off this small little stub right here. But we don't want to leave little short pieces. And sometimes it's easier to make 1 cut and remove several broken areas than making several small cuts. But you can see as he's going through this, it makes a big mess again, and you have to keep the grapple going and cleaning up and keeping those burn piles going to get rid of the debris. But you can see there's a lot of material up in this tree. And so on this, maybe one of these, maybe this shoot or this scaffold branch could have been cut off, whoops, right there. And maybe this could be cut a little bit shorter. But overall, he's doing a great job. But if you're in a native orchard or native grove, you may not want to be doing any type of this pruning. Just take those that are down, hanging in the tree, on the ground, cut those off and leave everything else to drop on its own. But in an improved orchard, it may be worth a little bit more to go in and do some more training. In a home situation, you may want to do a little bit more to get it back to an aesthetic look that you're looking for. We're looking to get these trees back into production and have a good structure. Now, there was a lot of differences in how the cultivars took the ice damage. And you can see on the right side, that's a block of Merrimack trees. These are all the same age, planted at the same time. But the Merrimack trees, they have a little bit different growth habit, and they're usually a little bit stronger wooded tree. And the only damage that we really had was some minor little limbs up in the top, and maybe every now and then we would have a larger limb on the side, but much less damage than anything else at the research station. The picture on the left is where the Merrimacks meet the Giles pecans. And so the Giles, they didn't do well with ice at all. And so every tree in this area in the Giles sustained major damage. It has more of a weeping growth habit and just could not tolerate the ice. And this block of Giles had not been harvested at all. Their Merrimack had been harvested once. So that may have a little bit of difference on the impact that the ice had on the damage as well. But these Giles trees, they're not gonna remain. We're gonna go ahead and remove those. We don't need the trees. We don't need the Giles cultivars. And they're just so damaged that we'll go ahead and push those out. Probably replant with something else. Arkansas usually is a strong structured tree, but we had a lot of damage. Could be that they still had all the nuts hanging in the tree. Pawnee sustained a lot of damage. Our bareroot and some of the other varieties didn't do that great either. So it's pretty amazing that the Merrimack did the best. Now, some of the trees that we're seeing some of the major damage on, it was because of the way they were structured. Those that didn't have the central leader or the one main leader system had more major splits in them. And so that early training, when you're getting your trees, the first few years of their training is so important to get that central leader structure in place. And so this tree, we're going to leave it in place just to watch and see if it heals over, but half of the tree is still standing. But you can see the close-up up here of where that bark, there was two main leaders and it just split down the middle. That bark right here, it's an included bark area, and so it just makes for an area where it never, it stays wet and it gets rotted, and so it can split out very easily. So those are things you look for when you're doing your pruning and training. But this is split almost all the way to the ground, but we're going to just leave it as a kind of take a look at and see how it does. There are other trees that split both directions, and this split down at the bottom goes even lower into that trunk. This one will just be cut off or pushed out. We won't try to retrain it. Some people do cut off a tree like this one at the top. They might cut this back and try to regrow that top onto it, but it's going to grow very vigorous new wood. It's going to be really difficult to retrain to get a good growth structure on that tree. You can see here's another that had the modified leader instead of a central, and it just split right down in the middle. So that tree will be removed as well. So here's a picture of November versus February, and this is our Bermuda fescue, or Bermuda, no, this is the fescue circles where we have Kansas. And you know, there was lots of downed limbs, lots of nuts. There's still a lot of nuts hanging in these trees that will go unharvested, but they haven't gotten to that area just yet. They finished the blocks of Kansas. They're almost finished with the Pawnee blocks. They'll start on the Merrimack, and then they'll push out the Giles, the Wellfield, and they'll start pruning on these circles as well. I'll give you an update next month on what else they're doing, and maybe a few more before and after of what things are looking like at the station. But I want to thank the guys at the research station and all the hard work that they've been putting in to try to get this back into shape. So what are we going to do now? We're going to continue the cleanup. We're going to reduce or eliminate our nitrogen fertilizer. We don't want to regrow too vigorous of growth that makes it weak. And so we want to regrow that more slowly so the wood will be stronger. We're going to use zinc foliar applications every 2 weeks, starting at bud break and going till the end of June to early July. And then we're going to watch the growth and see if we do need to add a little bit more nitrogen to get a little bit more additional growth. We may need to come back in the summer and do additional pruning. We'll watch that and see. It may be that we'll need pruning through the next couple of years to keep those trees in check. And then the trees that still have half of the canopy still intact, they may go ahead and fruit this year. But those that are severely damaged, it may take 3 to 5 years to get back into production, or maybe even a little bit longer on some of them. I just wanted to touch on the record temperatures. We've already kind of discussed just a little bit. I've seen some crazy numbers for low temperatures, like almost as low, I think -17 or 18. One positive right now is that the buds are dormant. And so if they were coming out of getting into more of a springtime, when those buds were starting to develop a little bit, we may have more damage, but they're fully dormant right now. If we have damage to wood, it would be because the trees are stressed due to overcropping last year. We may see some freeze damage to maybe new really vigorous grafts that hadn't hardened off into the fall. And then maybe on some of those more cold sensitive cultivars, we might see some damage on Caddo or Lakota, maybe up in the northern parts of the state, or if they were really heavily cropped this last year. But who knows what it's actually going to get down to. We'll talk about those kind of things next month, and we'll just wait and see what happens. Just wanted to mention that we have our Pecan management webpage that has a link to all of our videos and our fact sheets and information. And we have our Facebook page to share information that's timely. We have webinars scheduled for the next 3 are March 12th, April 9th, and May 7th. Each month you need to register, but appreciate everyone checking in and hanging with us. I know we're a little bit late today, but appreciate that. We've got a few questions here. Let's see. Someone asked, what was the age of the trees? The research station, most of those were planted in 1994. And so they're 20, 25, 26 years old. Some are larger than others because the smaller trees didn't have irrigation early on, and other areas were irrigated early in the life of the tree. But yeah, they're about 26 years old. Let me see. Do you expect any impact to the production from the ice damage? For the research station, yes. Other areas, maybe not as much. I know that Anne and Ann, who are both on the Zoom with us today, they had some damage in their orchards, hopefully not as bad as ours, but it should affect our production in that region. Kind of central Oklahoma down to Texas sustained some ice damage. Here's a question for Phil. Oh, did you already get it, Phil? Talk about the board.
Yeah, I tried to answer it as best I could.
Okay. You can check that out if you'd like to. And anyone else have any questions that you'd like to ask today? I know we're running long. You're always welcome to email me at any time with questions. Send Phil and I pictures. We'll be happy to help you out. we'll have the recording up and send it out to you maybe next week. We'll see how things go with the snow. But appreciate everyone tuning in. If you have comments, I'll send out a survey. If you want to see something different or additional, put it on the survey and we'll try to accommodate everyone's request. But appreciate it. And thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next month, and take care, stay warm. Thank you.